All righty. Well, it's 10:02, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting off. Let everyone know that the meeting is being recorded, and that we will have the uh, recording available shortly online, probably by the end of the week or so. For any guests that have joined us that is not a board member, we ask that you use the chat feature for your questions during the meeting, and then we'll take questions after the presentation as well. Jerry Watson, COG staff member, will be monitoring that chat and will be asking those questions on your behalf. So also, because we're doing this through Zoom, your attendance will automatically be taken for that, so there will be no need to take that board attendance. So Jimmy Sanders, Executive Director of the North Texas Innovation Alliance, which is a 501c3 consortium, is a cross-sector of organizations from public, private, civic, and academic working to build and implement a regional, smart, connected, and resilient strategy for North Texas. She will be our speaker today. And so when we get to item number 3, we'll turn it over to her. But we will remind everyone that all of our speakers do tie back to one or more of our goals within the SEDS. So obviously this would be part of it going forward. So before we do get to her presentation, we also need to take care of the new board members that we have coming in. We've got 3 coming on this time. Shay Hopkins is Director of the Economic Development for the City of Granbury. She'll be representing our population of less than 30,000. And then we have Jenny Mizatowicz. That's a mouthful. I had to ask her before we all got started how to pronounce her last name. She is the Director of Economic Development and Sustainability Liaison for the University of Texas at Dallas. And she'll be representing the education sector. And then we also have Dr. Jana Melsheimer. Am I getting that correct? Executive Director of Region 10 Education Service Center. And she's also obviously representing the education sector as well. So welcome, all 3 of you. And we're happy to have you aboard. I'm sure you'll be adding a significant influence to our decisions moving forward. And when we get ready, real quick, when do we redo and update the SEDS? When is it up next?
Yep. So the last update was in 2022. So the next one will be in 2027.
So it's coming up, got a couple more years yet. Okay.
Yes.
So, but yeah, moving forward with that and obviously being aware of what's going on in the DFW area. So I'm glad to have you, everyone on board for the new board members. So item number 3 is our board meeting minutes. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to look at those and review those. So if there's no one that has any questions, I'm happy to entertain a motion for those.
Move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. And then our next item, item number 4, I said 3 a while ago when I was talking about the guest presenter. Number 4 will be the North Texas Innovation Alliance, and Jennifer Sanders is the executive director there. So there will be a copy of the presentation also available online for everyone to review after the fact. And board members, if you have any questions after the presentation, you can unmute and ask those questions. And then for all guest attendees, I will remind you that to please use the chat for that, and Jerry will be monitoring that to ask the questions on your behalf. So Jennifer, with that, I'm going to pass it on to you and hear all about what you are working on.
Oh, wonderful. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for being here on a beginning of the week. I hope it's a good start to the week. Grateful to have been invited to come here and share a bit about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and what's coming up. And I will say that economic development is a through line across all of our priorities. I know that there's some broad statements in our mission, but really the 2 economic development corporations were actually the very first to raise their hand in 2020 and say, we get it, we're in. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. Gonna pull up this presentation, hopefully, if I can, too many windows open. Let's find out here. Apologize, everybody. For a tech-focused organization, sometimes this is not as seamless as we think. Okay. Let me maximize this for y'all. And so definitely interrupt me because I won't be able to see the chat. Just a reminder here. So really, again, you'll notice the cowboy on a drone here on the cover screen, and really what that speaks to is we always want to honor, you know, the pioneering spirit and how Texas and DFW kind of began in our entrepreneurship, you know, in a very different area and moving into the future. We wanted to throw them on a drone instead of a horse, and this is very well received when we travel. One of the biggest reasons or things that I'm passionate about is really telling the story. I don't necessarily believe that outside of North Texas, people do not think about us in this way still. And I find that particularly internationally, everyone laughs the most with J.R. Ewing. So it just shows the spread of that show really globally. But to the point of the cowboy on a drone, you know, we want to honor that spirit in the origination. We do want to make sure that people know that we have an identity that goes beyond it, the expertise, the growth in all kinds of areas. And I think a benefit of our region is the diversification of industry. I think that we're able to tell that story. I think we talk a lot about the stability, the business climate, the cost of doing business, the central location quite a bit. Where I think and where I focus on is how do I tell the story about how innovative and forward thinking that we are, specific subclusters that we have across the region, the research, but really everything that may or may not be as clear or as well known, again, particularly out of market. And so that smart city, smart region definition is different for everyone. You know, you all on the phone may have different definitions that you're working from, certainly across the country and the globe. Everyone has to really define what is their North Star, how are they looking at this? And what I found is over the course of the last 10 years, so I founded the Dallas Innovation Alliance in 2015, North Texas Innovation Alliance in 2020. But we knew at the beginning, especially in 2015, we had to figure out what that meant to us. And really, for us, we looked at a holistic definition rather than purely technology. So we really look at where is the intersection between technology, community, and data to create, you know, strong economic growth, resource efficiency, which we define as both internal, process-based, as well as natural resources. And then really, ultimately, it's about how are we improving the quality of life for all of those that live, work, and play here in the region.
Jennifer, before you go to this slide, could you get a little closer to the microphone just a little bit? I think there's several that are having a hard time hearing you there.
I should have.
That would be great.
Is this better?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you for letting me know. I'm soft-spoken.
Sure. I am too. I understand.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to repeat the definition for those that are in trouble or had trouble?
I think we're good there. If you want to just go ahead and just going forward, because we'll get the slides and everything.
Perfect.
And you're fine. Go ahead.
All right, beautiful. And this won't be a surprise to anyone on the phone, but really when we think about a collaborative approach, you know, to development, anything that we do, what we've seen is obviously tremendous growth, people in business and otherwise. And so what we're looking at, right, at this point, we're looking at aging infrastructure. We're looking at an increase in extreme weather events. How do we prepare from a resilience standpoint? Those blurring geographic boundaries, the most recent research I saw coming out of the regional chamber was that over 30% of residents of the region cross at least one county line every day. And I always say, you know, when I do that, I don't care where I am. I want the traffic signals to work. I want public safety to be able to get to me. I want to know that there's cohesiveness across jurisdiction, and that takes intentionality, especially from a technology side. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Workforce, obviously, as well, as we have more technical corporations here. What are we looking at for the future workforce, with which tech is a key portion of all? I'm going to talk about AI a little bit at the end as well. So again, this is really becoming more and more prevalent of a need, especially in North Texas. So when we look at an integrated approach, These are a lot of boxes, obviously, that's intentional. When we really look at all the pieces that need to come together for us to have the strategy we want to elevate the entire region across all of these areas, we need all of these voices and points of expertise at the table. And really what smart cities is to me in implementation is how can a single investment solve multiple problems? The benefit of a lot of the new tools that are coming out is that they can be used cross-purpose. That takes coordination. But then what we find for things as simple as dig once policies, if you're tearing up the street, how are we making sure that we're doing as many things as we know need to be done? Are we always laying conduit for fiber? Are we looking at smart street lights and finding technology solutions that can do everything from energy efficiency to traffic monitoring to public safety, environmental monitoring. There's many ways to look at these, but it does require cross-departmental coordination. And when we think cross-jurisdiction, it's about, does the technology we're each putting together, does that work together? Does it talk to each other effectively? And so just briefly about who we are, our vision was stated earlier. We are the largest initiative of our kind in the United States, both from a geographic size as well as the number of partners within a region. We believe, everything is bigger here. We also know that it needs to be. And so we're really looking at how do we bring all voices to the table. Everyone here is welcome if you're not already involved. I do see some familiar faces, but really, intentionality, my bandwidth has obviously limited reaching out to each of y'all individually. That's why forums like this are so important to me, because we want everyone to speak into what the needs are, find those common threads, and figure out where we can be a tool in the tool belt to advance those. And so as we look at the progression of local to regional to really national, looking at the benefits of these types of nonprofits, and there are other examples across the country. You'll notice we've come together to form the National Smart Coalitions Partnership, which is exactly as it sounds. For those of us that operate at the regional or state level in a similar model, what we're looking toward is how do we work, individually, regionally, and nationally to share best practices. One of the things that I love most about consortiums like this is we are just as or more open to saying this didn't work, please don't do this like this, please don't make this mistake, as we are to say what worked, because we all want each other to be able to move more quickly. The reason that when we founded DIA, when we went and spoke with former Mayor Rollins in Dallas, is we just said, Dallas really needs to get on this concept of a smart city. How are we doing this and thinking forward? We believe that it should be an independent organization to be able to move more quickly, be able to try things more quickly, and get the city the information and the data they need to know what investments should be put forward, can be justified financially, and which ones didn't work the way we thought they would. And we certainly found both in our initial living lab. So here, and I apologize, it's a little blurry, but our current membership is over 50 organizations. We are about 70% public sector of some variety, ranging from very small cities of, towns of 2,500 all the way up to obviously COG, and looking at region-wide. And what we really try and do is how do we provide information that accelerates. None of you have more time, money, or people than you need. And we know that this is a critical piece that often just can't be prioritized, is kind of zooming out and looking at these possible solutions, and really even understanding when we started in 2020, when we did the what keeps you up at night exercise and whatnot, one of the biggest things was we don't know what we don't know about 5G at that point, and we have vendors calling, and we have all of these people coming to us. We have our council coming to us and saying, why aren't we doing this? And we don't know what we don't know yet. We don't know the questions to answer. Can you help us with that? And so finding the smartest 5G experts, whether it was environmental, infrastructure, engineering, and the technology, how can we, again, save time and money by getting those answers as quickly as possible? And so innovation in the works. So again, another busy slide. It'll be easier when you guys can see it, but we were able to launch 5 new programs last year, and they range from everything from how do we come together as a region to look at internet, both broadband infrastructure and also human connection at an individual household level. And that's really meant to be an extension of some of y'all I know were involved in Operation Connectivity or Internet for Dallas, which launched during the pandemic as an initial mission to connect every K through 12 student to the internet in the home during remote learning. What we found is in 2022, that coalition kind of disbanded temporarily because we weren't quite sure what those goals should be moving forward, having solved for that. Last year, alongside COG, we relaunched the Internet for North Texas, which is, again, really focused on public sector and education and educational entities to really continue to now look at what's next. What do we need to be focused on next? The Urban Resilience Fellows program is meant to be a cross-departmental kind of capstone team within universities to really say, again, we need the computer science folks, but we also need the engineering, we need the architecture and urban planning. In some cases, we need legal. We need to understand if we want to do these things, what do we need to look at from a local policy perspective? What's hampering that innovation being implemented? After a conversation with the local FBI office, particularly their security and privacy and cyber fraud division, they just said, how can we support cities and startups and others in understanding what they need to know? We do tabletop exercises. We know we're not reaching everyone. And so they came in and did a breakfast briefing and let everybody ask whatever questions they had, some of which I was surprised they answered. And that was a really valuable tool, I think, for those that don't always have constant communication with that office. I'll talk about the Global Startup Challenge in a little bit, as well as the Smart City Expo World Congress. The other component that we try and do, and again, this is how do we test things fast so that you can both interact and see and touch and get to know companies that are doing new things and know what might be right for your jurisdiction. So that call for innovation was the initial one we did was with Dallas County around drones and robotics, everything from cleaning buildings, cleaning jails, where workforce is hard to keep, to parking management, other illegal dumping. A lot of different use cases, and those 20 companies flew down to do a live demo day, and some projects, not just with Dallas County, but other folks in the region have been able to pick those up and implement those. We really look at how do we be a convener, an educator, a matchmaker. We can do everything from find solutions that we know might be helpful to a problem identified or a specific use case. We also can do pilot, help manage pilots, similar to the Living Lab I'll talk about in a second. Every year we workshop together to identify priorities for the year. These are the 6 that popped up. Again, they're still very broad. So what we always say is we want to go from boiling the ocean to the Great Lakes to the Trinity River and get to beginning, middle, end projects that are able to that we're able to find learnings from, or we're able to bring in the smartest people I can find, certainly smarter than me, to help guide a smart way to implement and try new things. You'll notice this guy right here was the second priority of all of these. Too much here, you can read it later, but one of the exercises that we did was finding the headline that we most wanted to see, in a year or 2 years written about the region. And those are always fun ones. And then we actually used AI to work back on what do we need to do in the region to get there. And that could be, interim steps, like we talked about zoning. It could be financial models, et cetera. But these are some of the headlines that drove those priorities. So early learnings and successes. So in 2015, when the Dallas Innovation Alliance was launched, we decided that, the first project we wanted to be this living lab concept. We could test a lot of projects in the right of way. We could understand what worked and what didn't from an individual project level, but also utilizing data to say what impacts do multiple technologies, have against, broader use cases. And so in the West End, which we decided to do for a number of reasons. I'm not sure how many of y'all grew up in the West or grew up in Dallas in the 90s, 80s, 90s. But from what I hear, I did not live in Dallas at that point. The West End was the place to be, very happening entertainment district. It also took a more pronounced dip and stayed there, in the 2000s, and as other neighborhoods in downtown and kind of beyond really had substantial growth. And so our hypothesis was if you bring innovators and innovation and new technology and things like that into an area, it could have, small business neighborhood revitalization impacts for that. Let me skip forward to this one. So one of the 5 use cases that we developed, and I'll also send a link to the full case study for those that are interested. But what are this hypothesis around neighborhood revitalization, and through some of our projects that we're capturing data, we know that pedestrian traffic increased 13% year over year. We know small business revenue increased 12% year over year, and public safety crime decreased. And while none of these projects, obviously, would I ever take full credit for these, or would I say this is the thing? What we do know is if you have a better lit area, if you have more boots on the street, if businesses are able to capture that, you're going to have results. And from a pedestrian activity standpoint, one thing small businesses did is we made available traffic patterns, essentially, so they could really understand when are you getting spikes of people downtown. And one of the surprises was 2 to 3 p.m. Tuesdays and Thursdays. And we thought, okay, that's between lunch and dinner. What does that mean? And it's when El Centro class is let out. So what some of the restaurants did is they adjusted when their appetizer specials were, when their happy hour specials were, and believed that data helped contribute to capturing more revenue, keeping people in the district after class and whatnot. So that's just one example of how we really looked at how can small businesses, how can districts and cities benefit from these technologies. One of the two from a public space standpoint that are 2 of my favorites. Some of y'all may be familiar with this underpass that kind of splits the West End from Victory Park, where American Airlines Center is, where there's a lot of activity. When it's dark, it's unutilized. When people don't realize that is a pedestrian access point. You could walk 7 minutes versus circling and parking and getting frustrated and paying $40 to go to a game. And so this dynamic arch lighting, one harkens to the Dallas Alley neon lights that some of y'all may remember. It also creates a destination. It creates a gathering point, adds lighting, makes it very clear this is a place you can cross. We noticed a lot of Instagram activity after this went up. And again, the hypothesis was we're going to get more people walking if you create something like this. And we did a 6-month pre-installation measurement. We did 6 months post, and almost 20% increase in pedestrian traffic resulted after that project. Also, a parking lot became a park with West End Square right next to the spaghetti warehouse. And that's really provided a neighborhood amenity, a tourist amenity, a worker amenity, and there were innovation components put into that. A lot of people say, what is a smart park? Like, what the heck does that mean either? And we kind of said we kind of decided, well, that means smart materials, smart operations, and smart experiences. So how are we using the most sustainable materials? How are we putting technology in that has efficiency, and whether it's circular water, reclamation for the fountain, whether it's smart, efficient lighting, et cetera. And smart experiences really is about how are you creating delight and a destination that brings people back. And so I wanted to share some examples around the region, and then I'll do some national ones as well of how is innovation and economic development providing results or benefits. I'm not sure if anybody from McKinney is on the call, but really the McKinney Innovation Fund is something that I think is brilliant. You don't see very much. It also launched during COVID, which, was a time when there was a lot of impact to business. Obviously, companies weren't really looking to physically relocate during that time. But it launched in 2020 and provided no equity, but essentially investments in startups that would come to McKinney, would set up shop and really empower at different stages of growth. And so I need to double check these numbers are still current, maybe higher now, but really, looking at companies, creating jobs, creating good paying jobs, and then continuing to build upon that strategy is something that I think really shows that this is a model that, one, can be replicated, and 2, has proven to drive results. So those grant types range from $200,000 to, it was just raised to up to $500,000 in investment for startups. And what I think we've seen from the innovation challenge that we just did last year is that was a $10,000 cash prize, and that company was here last week looking for office space. Right. So it doesn't have to be a $500,000 to be able to incentivize companies, high growth companies and industries we want to develop, from bringing their talent and their sales tax revenue and their business here. So we talk a lot about advanced research, the importance of putting these into play at our research institutions. I know Jenny, very familiar with UTD and the IQ and in those areas. But these are just a couple of examples of large grants that are really in these spaces that support innovation, resilience, and a lot of the pieces that we know nationally are necessary, create a lot of IP. And you can see across the board how these continued clusters in different areas where we know we already have strengths can be continued to elevate. Businesses spin out, companies come here specifically because they see that investment and advancement in a lot of these core areas. So when we talk about, the mission of the NTXIA is kind of to look at the three cross sections, right? So we look at how do you look cross-departmentally for collaboration, cross-jurisdictionally, and cross-sector. And so one of the examples that that has come up in the last couple of years, which the contact with Plug and Play started at the Smart City Expo World Congress, resulted in Frisco and McKinney working together to bring Plug and Play, which is the largest accelerator in the world, to the area, distinctive verticals for each that complement each other, and really working together. And I particularly love this because what I hear a lot from other parts of the country is, how are you going to get people to work together? Everyone's competing for business. Everyone's competing for all these things. And I'm able to, I've honestly never seen that, in my experience, certainly. But this is a perfect example of how you wanted to reach a goal, you came together, that investment can be made and shared, and it can continue to amplify. I spoke about the call for innovation a little bit earlier. This is just some of the results of doing that. That was completely free. The companies came up on their own dime. And so this was of no cost to Dallas County. We received a whole lot of interest. We did select 7 county departments were involved to develop the use cases. With 65 attendees at demo day, other municipalities, other agencies, other universities, EcoDev, all came to that event to really learn and experience hands-on those new technologies. And we know it doesn't hurt to have third-party validation through the media. There was a great deal of earned media coming out of that initiative as well. So one of the hugest leadership pieces that COG took and RTC took that was finalized last year was designating broadband as a mode of transportation. Nationally, this I believe is the first of its kind for a COG. And really what that does is it opens up, one, it prioritizes connectivity. 2, it creates a layer of thought, in developing projects. Let's always look at where connectivity is a piece of this. And again, it's solving multiple challenges with a single investment. So by looking at with the remote workforce, with all of these other pieces, how do we look at this as an integrated part of the strategy of the different projects that are developed and put into place and funded here in the region? Also, my dog found another way to get back in the house, so she's probably going to talk in just a moment and add to the conversation. So when we think about, I'm trying to move my bars so I can fully see. When we look at the role of commercial real estate and public-private partnerships, often what we talk about is where walls in and walls out meet. And that's really the relationship between the public entity in terms of right-of-way and what investments are being made, as well as the commercial developers that are putting those buildings and those facilities in place. There are a lot of ways that those are working together with either shared investments, new incentive structures around putting in new infrastructure or advanced infrastructure. A lot of that is based on connectivity. Some of it is around loading zones. We hear a lot about the impact of on-demand delivery with double parking, with clogging, with creating additional congestion in more dense environments. And so really, how are we working together and how are we creating a way to have a kind of a smart right-of-way concept in working together with developers and with other sources of building up here. And so when we look at this, right, it's about street design, it's about understanding what the developer needs when you're, certainly during the recruitment stage. How do we share the investments, or how do we prioritize within the context of economic development and also quality of life for all that are in that space, obviously. And so we probably all hear a lot about living labs, about test beds, about closed campus environments. Those certainly are a really effective tool. One of our partners is the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance. They're doing incredible work. It's certainly worth digging in more deeply on their site, looking at some of their case studies. A recent partnership with Denver International Airport is going to open up a lot of opportunities from that standpoint. But this 5G Smart Cities test bed specifically was literally a public-private university partnership. Through some seed funding, they were able to create this physical environment in downtown Denver. They do cohorts of startups that come through that are in the smart space, however that is defined, and that can be self-identified to a certain extent. They go through a program. They're able to test both in the right of way. They're given the infrastructure that they need to test and commercialize, which is often that gap between an MVP and having it ready for investment. And a great deal. And I did not pull current statistics on what the outcomes are in terms of revenue raised, jobs created, companies that stay in Denver. But certainly this has been seen to be a really valuable tool here. And I know some of y'all have visited Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners. Peachtree Corners is about 40 minutes outside of Atlanta. It's a town of about 50,000. But their city made the decision to invest in creating this innovation hub, now called Curiosity Lab. That's a partnership. Curiosity Lab is a nonprofit. The city, they have some shared staff resources to make sure that cohesive connection is always there. And the results are creating a whole 5G environment in this campus. It's a shared kind of co-working accelerator space for startups in there. They have large companies like UPS that are testing some of their robotic delivery technology in there. And they just announced a partnership with NVIDIA, T-Mobile. So they've really, you don't have to be the size of Dallas to get these kind of investments and to have these kind of results. And I think that's really important to understand. And there's certainly examples that become models globally. Again, I think a lot of folks that I talk to say, but I'm just small, I'm too small. And that is 100% not the case. But they've been extraordinarily successful as well. Highlighting the IQ here for a moment. And so what I think is, what I've always thought is very impressive about the IQ is the intentionality of the design, of the zoning, of the designations there, which, there's a lot of ways to establish innovation districts and testing grounds. Not all of them take the time to really create this is a long-term ability to implement that withstands shocks or changes that have hindered progress and sustainability for others that have developed this. And so I just really wanted to give a shout out from this standpoint about the continued success and growth, and also the intentionality that went into the design and the infrastructure there. So a little bit about the big project I'm working on right now and hopefully signing a contract on today. We'll see. This will be the third year that North Texas has taken a delegation to the Smart City Expo World Congress. It's the largest smart cities conference in the world. It's in Barcelona every year. I often hear, of course you love it. It's in Barcelona. This makes perfect sense to me. And what I think is unique about this conference is that over half of the expo is public sector countries, cities around the world that have the booths. And so really you're able to walk through and learn peer-to-peer. You're able to learn and understand what's working, what's new, in addition to learning about the technology and the vendors and that recruitment standpoint, which is extraordinarily important. Also that peer-to-peer and the ability to be in a space where you're not getting sold, is also something that I find really valuable on our side of the house. And, speaking to those initial slides with the cowboys and everybody on there, what I really try and do is go find countries and tell them about what's happening here that they may not know or understand. DFW Airport, bigger than Manhattan, first carbon neutral airport, all kinds of things that are very surprising to them, but want to make this area feel like it's a home for companies like Exhibit there, where perhaps they were thinking we got to go to Austin to have a tech environment. We have more tech jobs than Austin does, right? People just don't know that. And so really this is, these are some of the results and what we were able to come out with. The two organizations that are kind of our lead partners in this are McKinney EDC and Frisco EDC, and others certainly over the course of over the years, from cities to colleges to others. But the Smart Cities Global Startup Competition was a really cool idea that came up kind of late in the game last year. We developed different use cases. We partnered with Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners, and the goal was really, one, how do we find really great technology through those that applied that perhaps we want to bring back and utilize here? How do we recognize startups and technology and innovation that we can bring over here from a business and economic development standpoint? And what we found is in honestly, a very short timeline in opening for submissions. We had 26 global submissions. We chose 4 finalists. The winner was from the Czech Republic. It's an AI solution with a heavy focus on public safety, traffic management, infrastructure monitoring, and healthcare. And part of their prize was to get flown here and be, business meetings, city meetings, really showing them around. And they were here last week. And again, we're looking for office space, had a really great experience. And we're really able to embed and look at that too. So what we know is there will be jobs created and new technology and opportunities here as a result of this competition. All right, everybody take a deep breath. Let's talk about AI. You probably heard a lot about it. We'll see if there's a bit of a different angle here for y'all. So the $19.9 trillion question, here we go. So the promise of AI, which I think we all know, again, similar to technology affecting everything, us all working together, artificial intelligence may change everything. And so what we look at a lot is, how does it personalize education? Whether it's for those with learning differences, whether it's for workforce advancement, upskilling, and things of that nature. Similarly with healthcare access, public safety, and predictive identification of threats, et cetera, disaster response. So there's many ways that artificial intelligence is applied. When I initially put this slide together for a presentation a year ago, there were not many use cases that were ready to talk about that had been completed or projects in completion in all of these areas. They're really, I could name several for each of them now, which is great. We can all continue to learn and understand what's working. What you may not realize, we've all been getting kind of these texts for several years in terms of identification of fraud. Unfortunately, some of those texts themselves are fraud. So that's a challenge that we look to help educate the community certainly on. If you get a text that has a link, you'd never click on that link, period, as an example. But these pieces are moving quite quickly. So a recent IDC report talks about this giant number, and that's only at 2030. So this is extraordinarily fast growing, as we know. One of the things that I'm passionate about that is obviously very, very relevant to economic development and the strategies therein is the physical construction, electricity use, water use of data centers, and certainly the backbone of AI. None of this, I know that there's been a ton of talk about this. It's not necessarily new. And what we know from the tools that AI can play in economic development specifically is something that we're seeing some really interesting tools, really interesting use cases around that as well. And so what we look at here are a couple of case studies. One has been used in Cincinnati, and they've been using this for a handful of years already. But it's honestly automating work that y'all do every day, but used to have to do manually, combing through databases took a great deal of time. So they really looked at going to predictive analytics, looking at company growth across the country and saying, these guys are clearly going to need to expand, or we know they're looking to expand, and being able to get on the phone, get on the horn, and start building towards those leads immediately. I think 2018, I was able to go on one of the missions through the chamber in the airport and went to Toronto and Montreal. And that was really focused on smart cities and transportation. And what at the very end during the debrief, one of the mayors that was attending just looked at me and said, "Is Montreal really the global leader in AI?" And I said, "They're considered to be right now." And he goes, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because a public official stood on a rooftop and said, we are going to be the global leader of AI. And then they put some money behind it. And then investment from Samsung and Google and others came. And truly, that was what it is. They kind of spoke it into existence. But that individual had to get on a rooftop and say, what do you need to be able to come here? We will do it. We will find a way to do it. I think Pittsburgh, similarly, in 2018, when they were announced to be the formal test bed for Uber's autonomous vehicles, they were one of the initial spots. Mayor Peduto at that time said the same thing. He said, autonomous vehicle companies, tell me what you need on the roads to be able to do this. We will find a way to do it. And so I think that's stepping up and showing we are beacons of innovation. We are willing to take that step to be ready for you has certainly proven to be a strategy, particularly, in this new tech space, and like, who is ready for us to come? Who is ready to give us what we need? And so when we look at AI infrastructure considerations and how P3s, I believe can be a model, some parts of the country are already looking at this. So how do we look at the balance between getting them here, balancing the needs of the region and residents in things like, infrastructure, electric and water. Water is often the second thought. Water is also not a regenerative resource. And so what I've been really looking at recently is what companies and what technologies are using alternative cooling measures. Where is their reclaimed water and cycled water use for the cooling of those data centers? And how can we be intentional in sites where we're either presenting that they locate or where we know that they are going to come? And how do we create a win-win from that standpoint? And some of that looks like, are we creating kind of a resilient site that can be used for public and private use in the case where there is a natural disaster, in the case where a community needs somewhere to go, if power is out, if the communication lines go down, whatever that looks like. And so a community building that could either be small business focused, but it's something that can be stood up and known to be a gathering place when those things occur. So we want to look at how are we benefiting the public as well as the private sector. And again, showing that investments that allow for successful deployment and growth of that company that there is that commitment to it. So some of those use cases that, you lost my Bill Nye, you got a preview of my Bill Nye closing. But some of the AI use cases in progress, really, a lot of them are not the sexy stuff. They are the really critical needs that where money and resources can be most maximized or saved. And we hear a lot about using AI during permitting process, shortening that, reducing errors, being able to give staff more time back in their day to work on other things if they're not having to manually crawl these applications and get back, which is still a challenge. So AI in building permits, AI in infrastructure monitoring. How do we save money knowing when roads need to be repaired? How do we understand what the possibilities of locates are? So in some site locations that need to be cleaned up or haven't been used for a while, we don't know where the locates are. It's that hasn't been used in too long. These AI can help to understand where that infrastructure is. Similarly with coordinating street cuts, if you know that there's a permit that's been filed for water upgrades, gas upgrades, AT&T wants to run fiber, that street needs to be repaired. Can you make sure that that timeline is such that all of those things get done the one time the street is cut? AI can really support that. And then finally, these people can be a little bit creepy. I'm not going to lie. I've seen several of them, but these are AI bots or AI humans that can have those two-way conversations that support wayfinding. A lot of cities I know are looking at advancing this for the World Cup as an example, which obviously is a great opportunity to implement improvements in the region, and certainly COG are doing Yauman's work, and that checklist is wild, and I'm so impressed and in awe of what it takes to do this. And when we're thinking about the number of languages represented, when we're looking at the amount of movement of people and whatnot, when we talk about maximizing small business impact of this, having these guides and the resources that they provide is something that I know is being looked at very seriously, and certainly is a new way to use a tool like this currently and in the future, particularly in areas like parks. And this has been a ton of information, I know, but really I love this Bill Nye quote. I found that some of my staff no longer knows who that is, so I clearly need another reference as I'm reaching that new generation beyond them. But really, one of the things that I think is most important in innovation is humility, and walking into a room and knowing that there are ideas that are new that I may not understand, that I may not think will work. But really recognizing that, that again, everyone you ever meet knows something you don't. And so trying to walk into every room with that has been tremendously helpful to me. I often say high school students have given me some of the best ideas I've had in the last 10 years. And so again, bringing everybody into a room, I think is just critical. And that concludes my presentation, and hopefully I haven't overwhelmed with so much information. There's no questions to be had, but I'm happy to talk.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, so much for your presentation. Does anyone have any questions at this time? I know that was an awful lot to digest. Hopefully we'll have time to download the presentation later this week and have another look at it and look at it at a more leisurely pace. Hey, Craig, how are you? Do you have a
Good.
question?
Yeah, more a comment as we head into updating the comprehensive economic development strategy. I think what Jennifer just presented should be highly incorporated or a large part of what we do with the SEDS. There's a lot of elements that she touched on that have very collaborative and I don't know what to say, basically common themes that we have in our SEDS. So I highly recommend Jennifer be a part of that, and we leverage her documents.
Yeah, that's very good item to point out there. We do have a lot in common as far as those bullet points and things that we're trying to accomplish with that strategic plan. Jennifer, your group has done quite a bit in the technology sector, and obviously working with transportation, trying to make things, bringing us into the next millennia here as we move forward, especially with the AI component. And that's something I don't think we've addressed with the SEDS. We probably certainly need to next time that we do that review. So just some food for thought there. Does anybody else have anything else?
I have a question
Okay.
for Jen, just about, it's so important to get buy-in from individual cities to make this work regionally. And having worked for both city governments and higher ed, I know that sometimes you get you talk to the right people, but then when these people try to communicate to the departments that could actually make the impact, it kind of stalls. And so do you have any strategies for, I guess, kind of getting it through that bottleneck of really engaging the right person in each department to make something like this happen successfully?
I can tell you that anytime someone's like, so how have you overcome, election cycles, or how have you made sure, sustainability, everybody in the space, is like, oh, it's always different. Right. And so I think, but the one phrase that someone said to me early on was, be careful about the middle melt. And I think what from their standpoint, if y'all aren't familiar with that phrase, it really says, you need the treetops, you need leadership, you need frontline workers. Often some of these innovation deployments, especially that change internal processes, they kind of die at the manager level. If there's not, that's buy-in that's critical, obviously, to the success. And if they're not engaged early enough and feel like it's being shoved upon them, some will just kind of opt out in whatever way that's possible. And so I think there she is. I think the engagement really across, from top to bottom, which sounds simple, but is not easy, particularly limited time. I think the right person does depend on the jurisdiction, or on the specific makeup of a city or an entity. But certainly what we found in terms of the deployment of it is what I found to be successful is, some of our members bring in 6 different department representatives to our meetings. They've bought in, they get in the room. And I think some of the light bulb moments that have come up, coming in that room and saying, I wasn't sure why I came to this meeting. This topic didn't feel relevant to me. I get it now. I get where that intersection point is so important. And then you've kind of created that cross-department buy-in that can help with the budget process, in terms of when you're proposing, this is actually shared across department to meet both objectives. But again, I think getting folks that don't work together every day in a room, in an environment like that, can be really effective in building up at the departmental level. Obviously the buy-in, which includes both, the moonshot and then the quick wins, is something that we really try to be mindful of. A colleague of mine always says, when you come in with goals, have 5, make sure 2 or 3 of them actually are already done. Research what's already happened, what projects are already in motion within your city or within an entity, and then point that out, because often, one department doesn't realize this department is invested in X that helps them get to Y. And so again, he talks about the 3 of 5 rule. Some of you on the line probably know who I'm talking about also. But again, and so I really try and dig deeply into what's been done, what bond projects have been approved, and what could be that while we're at it, to be able to get to the end game that maybe hadn't been considered. That was a bit long-winded, but it does depend. There's certainly one city in the region that was trying to help support on I'm going to walk away from her while I talk. There was one jurisdiction I was able to help support get a new initiative done. And it took about a year to figure out who was the person that could move it forward. And so I think it's often just a ton of conversations until you hit that sweet spot. I wish there was an A + B = C, but clearly from my long answer, there is not typically, but there are strategies to craft it. And again, that's why storytelling, I think, is so important in terms of how are you translating, particularly a new technology. How do you make that relevant to the daily experience?
Yes, a lot of that has to do with, the individual communities and know your audience. I think is a lot of it. Know the people that you're communicating with and trying to work with, and what their objectives are. So yeah, totally agree with that. So is there anything else before we go on to new business? Okay, well, if not, Jennifer, I'm going to take the reins from you and we'll move on. So new business, does anyone have anything that they would like to share? Anything exciting going on in their county or either their city, education, anything of that nature that you think is worth sharing with the group? I know that we personally here in Ellis County are very excited to see our county judge, Todd Little, to become the new executive director for the North Central Texas Council of Governments. He'll be taking over from Mike Eastland, who recently announced his retirement. So I think Todd takes over on May 15th. And so we'll have a little more representation there. Hopefully he'll be unbiased with his love for Ellis County when that comes in. But anyway, that's what I have to share. Does anybody else have anything else?
I might mention one thing.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm actually, if you can tell, I'm in a closet right now for the Zoom because right outside over my shoulder, our organization is hosting a workforce academy for high school seniors. It's another 30 kids that have gone through our second career club, second annual. We'll put nearly 60 people into the workforce with automatic job offers. And I've got Workforce Solutions with us. I've got about 15 or 20 people in here helping with everything from interviews to VR presentations to you name it, but they're going through about 6 rotations of pretty cool stuff. And so I'm gonna have to jump off this call, but it's pretty cool because in just a few weeks, we'll have another 30 going into the workforce.
That's exciting news. It's always great to see those kids coming out of high school and jumping into the career of their choice. Good to
Yeah.
see them moving on and growing up and
It's pretty cool,
contributing to the economy.
for
So,
sure.
yeah, great to hear about that. Does anyone have anything else? Well, if not, again, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time to share your presentation with us today and telling us about your organization. Everyone, again, that presentation will be available online and you can have another look at it. Our next virtual meeting will be held on Monday, August the 4th, 2025 at 10 a.m. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to adjourn the meeting at 10:57. So before I do that, you didn't have anything else, did you?
No, I did not. Thank you,
Okay,
everyone.
all right, good deal. So before everyone signs off, well, everyone have a great rest of your week, great rest of your Monday, and we'll see you in August.